Hi, this is Jordan again. I am going to do another video on the narrative reaching critical mass. And it is centered around the hate crime hoax that Jussie Smollett put on. And I'm going to provide a little bit more detail into what I mean by the narrative reaching critical mass. So, what I'm going to start out with is this GQ article that I'm sure most of you have seen at least the headline for. And I would like to point out that he says the racist homophobic attack on Jussie Smollett is far-right America's endgame. What I would like to point out, I don't know Joshua Rivera. I don't follow him on anything, and I've never heard of him until I became aware of this article. But the question I have for him, but obviously I'm just going to pose it to you because he'll never watch this, is what do you think he defines far right as when he says it's far right America's end game? Obviously he's alluding by end game. He's alluding to the fact that this is what he thinks, in his opinion, this is what the far right wants to perpetrate, and expand and grow, or these hate crimes, these attacks on blacks and gays or whatever. But the question I have is, who's far right? Because from everyone I've talked to in person and the interactions that I see online through Twitter or whatever else, if you are anything other than a far left socialist, then you're far right. Where the center doesn't exist anymore, and the center left, I suppose, would be the Democrats that aren't socialists, and then literally everything else is just far right or alt-right. There's no more center or center-right or moderate conservative or anything like that. So it's just interesting that he would say far right when I could be wrong, but I have reason to believe that in general, pretty much anyone who supports Donald Trump or is a Republican or anything like that is considered far right. So when he says, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because when he says far right America's endgame, he's just using that as a euphemism to say, a whole list of other things, but to basically just say right, the right wing's endgame, or right wingers endgame, or Republicans endgame, or MAGA supporters endgame, or Trump supporters endgame, literally any of those things. And where it was allegedly a racist and homophobic attack, he could say it's white America's endgame, or Christian America's endgame. Like literally any of those things that are traditionally, I don't want to say traditionally, that have recently been attached to hatred and bigotry, which just isn't true, but that's what the left is really, really trying to do, is attach those things, being white, being a man, being straight, being Christian, supporting Trump, any of that. They're very strongly trying to associate those things with hatred and bigotry. And obviously these kind of terrible attacks, when they actually do happen, obviously this one turned out to be a hoax. But in order to explain what I mean by the narrative reaching critical mass, in case you haven't seen my video on the Covington Catholic school kid situation with Nathan Phillips, the narrative is basically what I just outlined, what he's using this for, as a euphemism for. The narrative is just America sucks, America's a terrible, evil, horrible, racist place, and the people who perpetuate that are, white people, men, straight people, Christians, Trump supporters, conservatives, just in general, anyone with right-wing views. That's the narrative, right? Those are terrible people, they're evil, they're awful, they're racist, they want to control your body, if you're a woman or whatever. Kind of crazy, sophist propaganda, lies that they spew, all of that. That's all part of the narrative. So it can be very big and broad, and it can be very pointed and specific. Like, for example, in this specific case, they're just saying America is racist and homophobic, or, Christians are homophobic, Trump supporters are both racist and homophobic. So they can kind of give and take. They don't have to use the entire narrative for each and every situation, but it's broad enough to where, any incident like this, they can pull pieces of their narrative out and insert it into the story. And the reason why they're doing that, in my opinion, is what I call the narrative reaching critical mass, which is basically just classical conditioning. So in case you haven't heard of Pavlov's dog, I've got this little diagram, and it's very simple. So you have a unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response. So this is the natural order of things. So when you're about to give food to a dog, or you give food to a dog, the dog starts salivating. And in case you haven't heard, this is a real thing. Pavlov is the psychologist that discovered this, and eventually got a Nobel Prize. But this is true in people as well, so don't think I'm saying that it's just dogs that do this or whatever, in case you're unfamiliar with this. But here's the basic premise. The dog, Pavlov noticed that his dog would salivate when it was time to eat or whatever. So what he did is he took a neutral stimulus, which in this diagram it's depicted as a tuning fork, and obviously so he flicks it and it makes the noise. Obviously the dog isn't going to have any kind of normal, regular response to a tuning fork. There's no automatic function like food. The dog obviously knows what food is, whereas the tuning fork, it just makes a noise. So there's no response. What happened is, when he fed the dog, he'd get the tuning fork out and flick it, and it would make the noise. And over time, the dog associated the tuning fork noise with food, so that when he didn't have food or wasn't about to feed the dog, he could, hit the tuning fork, and the dog would start salivating because it hears the noise of the tuning fork. The dog has then associated this conditioned stimulus with the normal, natural stimulus. So how this relates to the narrative reaching critical mass is, the normal stimulus would be the hate crime. In this incident with Jussie Smollett, the alleged hate crime, which, as we all know by this point, turned out to be a hoax. But that is, in and of itself, if it did happen, let's just pretend it was true, that is a very disturbing, disgusting thing, right? So the stimulus is the hate crime, and the response is disgust, disturbance, anger, whatever it is. Those are good, not positive, but those are good, normal, natural responses to have to the stimulus. What the media is doing, and what a lot of celebrities and everyone else who's got this far left-wing agenda, what they're doing is they're attaching a neutral stimulus, which is, in most of the recent cases, like with Covington Catholic and with Jussie Smollett, they're inserting this neutral stimulus of, whatever it happens to be at the time, a MAGA hat, a Trump supporter, a white person, a male, a straight person, a Christian, whatever it is in that specific incident, and, the story that's happening at the moment, they can just insert any piece of the narrative into that. So that over time, what you end up doing is conditioning people to react to your inserted stimulus the same way that they would react to the natural stimulus, right? So now, after this conditioning, when someone sees a MAGA hat, the emotional response that they have to seeing a MAGA hat is disgust, disturbance, hatred, anger, fear, right? So whatever the emotion that they have, whatever their emotional response is to the original stimulus, the story that they're attaching it to, they then start associating those, what are essentially images, with that emotional response. So that is the critical mass portion of the narrative, is when people start to internalize this anger, mistrust, disgust with a symbol, with an image. So you can take a person that you know nothing about and put a MAGA hat on them, and now all of a sudden when you see them, you think, wow, they're a terrible, horrible, evil, mean, racist person. They're homophobic. You can make all sorts of assumptions and generalizations about this person because of the emotional response that you have been programmed to feel when you see a MAGA hat. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical object like a MAGA hat, an actual symbol. It can be a lot more abstract than that, because in many ways the narrative, all of these conjoining thoughts, all culminate into ultimately what is hatred for America and what America stands for, what America has been historically. And the way that they're able to do that, which is essentially blurring linear time. So historically, America has been predominantly white, predominantly Christian, predominantly straight, predominantly led by men in all of the positions of power or whatever, right? So you take all of those historical facts and then you try to just smush it into today and say, well, because all of these things happened in the past, now this new story that just broke, it is somehow a continuation of all of the historical injustices, right? So when Jussie Smollett was attacked, or when he claimed he was attacked, everyone just automatically had this response that, oh, America is still a racist place. When you think about it, and this is why I say that the narrative has reached critical mass, there were a lot of people who responded to the attack by saying America is racist, or America is homophobic, or Trump supporters are this, MAGA hat wearing people are this, whatever it is. Once the story turned out to be a hoax, and the whole thing was fabricated. Like, it wasn't even like a little bit, like a grain of truth that he just kind of elaborated on. Like, Jussie just made up the entire thing. The whole thing was fake. How many of those people that posted, like, literally the day of the alleged attack, they got on their social medias and they started posting all this stuff about how terrible America is, how terrible Trump supporters are, all of these things. How many of them do you think, once they learned that the attack was a complete hoax, looked back, like did some introspection and looked back and thought, maybe Trump supporters aren't racist. Maybe people who wear MAGA hats aren't homophobic. Maybe people who say this is MAGA country are actually nice people, even though I've never heard anyone say this is MAGA country. But anyway, how many of them do you think did any kind of introspection? And that's the point. That is the critical mass, is the fact that they have been so conditioned that it doesn't matter. It does not matter that the story was a hoax. The emotional response is the same. That is what stays with them. The facts didn't change, but the facts as they became available changed the narrative. And as that is absorbed, they might be able to, a lot of these people, they might be able to logically understand, oh, this was a hoax. But what they don't ever take the time to do, or at least from what I can see, what these people never take the time to do, is do some actual introspection and try to understand the feelings that they had regarding this incident and modify them to fit the facts as they're revealed. And this is something that has been built over time, so I'll link these websites in the description, but Andy Ng here on Twitter has been very diligent in posting all of the hate crime, well, I mean, maybe not all of them, but a lot of hate crime hoaxes that have happened over the years. And it's all um, very similar in the way that all of these hate crime hoaxes, whether it's, you know, a black person saying that they were attacked because they're black, or a gay person saying they were attacked because they're gay, or a Jew saying they're attacked because they're Jew. You know, whatever it is, your victim status, whatever victim group you belong to, and that you're trying to build some kind of victim points for, it all has the same perpetrator, which is basically just white people, straight people, Christians, Trump supporters. Like those are the big broad groups that all of these hoaxes fall under. So I'll link this in the description. You can scroll through this and read about each one. But the idea here is that over time, each one of these that happens, it's the same thing. It's kind of like the boy who cried wolf. Every time it happens, you have an emotional response to this. You know, a Muslim student claims she was attacked by a white man who threatened to burn her hijab. Okay, you hear that story, you're like, oh my gosh, that feels bad. Like, you feel bad for this person because that's a normal, natural human response to have, at least for caring and compassionate people. That emotion sticks with you even after the story develops and it turns out, it's not the case. It didn't happen. But that emotional response that you had, that's burned deep into your brain. And that's what helps build the critical mass in people's minds. That even though it comes out, you know, how many, we've scrolled through, I don't know how many of these, several of them. Time and time again, you keep seeing these stories, and every single time you have an emotional response. And that just keeps building and building to where whenever you get a new story, like this Jussie Smollett thing, the Covington Catholic, as soon as you see the story, and granted, when they report the stories, the media poisons the well, and they already tell you what to think, which is the definition of being biased and subjective in their reporting. But either way, you can see these things, like when you see the picture of, you know, none of the pictures of the Jussie Smollett thing were very clear, but the Covington Catholic thing, all you saw is that picture of Nathan Phillips and Nick Sandman in the MAGA hat, and you just automatically assume that guy is the guilty. The one with the MAGA hat, he's guilty. He's the bad person. Because you have been so conditioned over time to look at all of these things, and you've got such negative emotions that are attached to each and every one of these news stories, even though they turn out to be hoaxes every time, not every time, but in these ones that we just scrolled through, they all turn out to be hoaxes, but what you fail to do is go back and readjust the emotional response that you had to that. So, two things that I'd like to point out before I close real quick. Here on Mediaite, you know, there was some controversy with Brian Stelter on CNN. He was saying that it wasn't the media that was pushing this story about Jussie Smollett, or they weren't the ones that were being misleading or dishonest in the way that they were reporting it, and he was basically trying to say that they were responsible in the way that they provided caveats to the story, which is completely untrue. So what this is, it's just a compilation of actual, you know, publications, news companies, and stuff like that. Their contributors, editors, whatever. These are a list of their tweets, and so it's basically showing like, no, it wasn't just random people on Twitter or celebrities who were pushing this story without any caveat to it potentially being untrue due to the fact that none of the facts were known at the time. It was just a claim. But anyway, so that's enough about the origin of this, but there's two tweets in here that I would like to point out as really showing what I'm trying to describe as the narrative reaching critical mass. So Violet Blue here, an Engadget writer, she just says straight up in her tweet, red hat equals white hood, period. So she has been conditioned to think that the red hat, like the MAGA hat, obviously I'm assuming that's what she means, the MAGA hat equals a white hood. So there's a whole lot of historical context that goes into the white hood and the KKK and all of that stuff. And when she sees a red hat, she can know nothing, absolutely nothing about the person wearing the red hat. She just knows that person's wearing a red hat, therefore racist, homophobe, bigot, transphobe, Islamophobe, whatever. All of these terrible, evil, awful, horrible things are just automatically applied to this person. The next tweet that I would like to highlight is this guy here, an NBC Associated Press news writer and producer, Brian Latimer. He says here in the middle, America is not safe for queer people, especially if they are POC, people of color, or colored people. America is not safe. When I first read this is the first thing I thought of. It's not the greatest analogy, but it's just what I thought of. So when you take, let's say, America is not safe for queer people, because granted this isn't, even though this attack turned out to be fake, let's say it were real, this isn't the only time a gay person has been attacked for being gay. I get that. But the numbers are very small. The amount of gay people who are physically attacked because they're gay is pretty small in America. So what he's doing here is saying, well, people get attacked by sharks in the ocean. And, some of them live, some of them die. Either way, shark attacks are terrible, and they're horrible, and they're awful. And since people get attacked by sharks in the ocean is not safe for people. That's the argument that he's making here. Now, granted, you can have, different risk tolerances. Like some people don't like swimming in the ocean because sharks do attack people in the ocean. And that's fine. If that's, above your risk tolerance, that's okay. But the fact of the matter is, he's trying to make that argument about America in general. That America is just not safe for queer people. And there have been similar people who have tried to make the same claim about being black in America or Hispanic in America, that it's not safe. And this just goes into, like I said, some of the classical conditioning in regards to the critical mass of the narrative can be applied to a symbol or an object like the MAGA hat or Trump supporters or whatever. But ultimately, all of that falls under the category of America sucks. America is the worst. America is racist. America is sexist. America is misogynistic. Whatever other terrible things that people think America is and stands for, that is what they're trying to push. That's the ultimate narrative, of which all of these minor components are just a part of. So hopefully this example has helped build my case for the critical mass of the narrative, because I don't know what the ultimate conclusion is going to be to this, but the longer it goes on, the worse it's going to get. And why I think it's such a problem is the fact that a lot of these, in this video I focused on just the emotional response and how over time you keep having very similar negative emotional responses to these stories, even though a lot of them turn out to be hoaxes. That still starts to guide and shift your worldview and the way that you think about politics or certain people. But what I think is ultimately going to happen is that enough people, more and more people, are getting to the point where they don't care about the facts, right? Now that it's turned out to be a hoax, like how many of these people do you think have taken back what they said? The point is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that the hate crime against Jussie Smollett never happened. And the reason why it doesn't matter is because all of these people have already been brainwashed into thinking that the MAGA hat wearing people are a certain type of way, that Trump supporters are a certain type of way, that Republicans are a certain type of way. So it doesn't matter. The facts no longer matter. And that's why the critical mass of the narrative is so dangerous, is because at some point, I don't think too far in the future, depending on how things go or continue going politically, it's not going to even be relevant if there are ever any hate crimes in America. People will be so conditioned to hate a certain group of people, which is anyone who supports the traditional sense of America and what it stands for, constitutional type minded people, that there could be absolutely no problem with anyone, and yet they'll still hate that group of people and blame them for all kinds of things. So I think that's the end goal of the narrative. I mean, it's really just political posturing. The media is really trying to get a very substantial subset of people, a very substantial demographic of people in America, to be so brainwashed by the narrative that they no longer need to even be news companies. They no longer need to produce facts, report on stories. They can just pump out a bunch of puff pieces about how terrible MAGA hat wearing people are, Trump supporters, Republicans, males, white people. That's the ultimate goal. And as we go forward, I'll continue to add to my videos about the critical mass of the narrative and build my case through stories as they come up. But hopefully you enjoyed this. If you have any comments, if you agree, disagree, or think I'm being over dramatic, feel free to leave your comments. I'll take your comments into consideration. But if you enjoyed it, leave a like, and I'll see you in the next one.